and Councillor Wren, and Councillor Chilcott is here as substitute for Councillor Woods.
Excellent, thank you. Anybody aware of any other apologies? Okay, thank you very much. Right, item 2 of the minutes from our previous meeting. Is it your wish that I sign them as a true record of that meeting? If so, can I have a proposer? The proposing, a seconder? Thank you, Sarah. And all those in favour, please show. Thank you. Sure. You weren't there, man. Yes, sorry. My brain does catch up with me eventually, Mandy. Yes. Okay, so I'll sign those when you're ready. Okay, so item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest that people wish to make at this stage? I'm not seeing any other than the standard declarations, membership of the parish councils, etc. The standing item for us. I'm not seeing any. Okay, thank you. Public question time. Roy, do we have anybody registered for public question time?
No one's registered to speak under this item, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to move into our agenda proper, which starts for the first application is agenda item 5, and that starts at page 23 in your documentation pack. Presenting officer is Russell Williams. The application is 3/26/21/002, and it's outline planning permission in Washford. So presenting officer is Russell Williams. Russell, good afternoon and welcome to the committee. And when you're ready, we'd be delighted to hear your report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so members, we have before you today an application for outline planning permission with all matters reserved except for access for the erection of 8 dwellings on land to the edge of Washford Village. The application was, for background information, the application was previously put to members as part of the former Somerset West and Taunton Council in March 2023, and the decision at that time was taken to defer the application in order to allow officers and to assess the sustainability effectively of the village of Washford, its service provision, facilities and so on, and its suitability for continuing to support new housing developments. That in particular was in response to some concerns raised by members at the time over policy SC1 and whether Washford continued to meet the requirements as to fall as a primary settlement under policy SC1. That said, members should be looking at the application afresh and the additional information that's been provided and assessed since March has been assessed by officers and is referred to in the officer report. So the application site itself is highlighted here just inside the red circle, just off of Hewish Lane to the northeastern or eastern side of Washford Village. And here we've got the red line area, which shows the extent of the application site. The blue line obviously indicates land that's also owned by landowners. The access plan here indicates how access will be derived into the site. It's effectively an existing access that serves the village allotments, a number of residential properties, some which have just recently been constructed to the western side of the access track. The access itself has been assessed by Highways. It does meet the minimum requirements in terms of visibility displays and so on and so forth. So when the application was originally received back in 2021, which does seem like quite a long time ago now, it originally proposed 10 dwellings on the site, and the plan in front of you there on the screen shows the extent of the development that was originally submitted. That has subsequently been amended to omit 2 units, so that the development has been revised back from 10 to 8 units, and it's the land to the eastern side of the site here, where a couple of units were originally indicated as being delivered, that's been omitted from the scheme, and so the amended site plan is that now up on the screen, and that effectively is an outline plan. It's indicative only, so we're not looking to secure layout at this present moment in time, but that indicates that 8 dwellings, which would comprise, based upon that plan, of 4 2-bed units, 3 3-bed units, and 1 4-bed unit. and officers are content then in terms of the scale of development that can be accommodated on the application site. There was a previous application here, just for background context, and that was 2019 application that proposed 14 dwellings on the site. And the layout there, which you can see in front of you, is an indication of what was proposed at that time. That application was refused by the council. It then went to planning appeal, and the appeal was dismissed. And as stated in the report, the reasons for refusal related to the impact of the development upon the setting of the Linhay, which is a Grade 2 listed building on the southern edge of the site here, and also conflict with policy SC1, whereby the planning inspector felt that 14 dwellings did not comply with the definition of limited development under SC1, and that, together with the impact upon the setting of the listed building, resulted in the application being refused. So site photographs, just to show some context. This is stood on Hewish Lane and looking at the existing access, which is proposed to serve the development. It's quite a wide access. This is stood in the access, and this is looking west towards the village. And this is looking east, back in the Bridgewater direction, back towards the A39, just at the top of the lane there. Hewish Mews along the road frontage. It's quite a new development and an attractive little group of properties. Again, just some context in terms of the site and the road frontage. These are 5 recently completed properties, which are immediately on the western side of the application site, and immediately adjacent to the access drive. This is stood in the very corner of the application site, looking back at the rear of those properties that were shown to front onto Hewish Lane. There's an access track, which you can see here, which goes through and provides parking for those properties. Again, just looking from the access drive into the site and along that access track, the building in the background with the stone walls and the slate roof, that is the Grade 2 listed building in question. Again, just a slightly different angle. Access into the site would come in on this corner, as indicated on the indicative plan. And again, just looking across the field. So this is stood in the very far corner of the lane, serving those existing properties that front onto Hewish Lane. Just looking back towards those dwellings at the bungalows at the bottom. And again, just some context of how the site currently sits. So the key considerations are just listed there on the screen, and I'll just run through those briefly for members. In terms of the principle of the development, Washford is the primary settlement that's been identified within the local plan as being suitable for future residential development, and that effectively comes to fall under policy SC1, and policy SC1 does support limited development across the plan period for up to 10% increase in the number of existing houses within a settlement up until 2032. At present, Washford has an outstanding delivery of approximately 21 units, and so the existing housing count within the village at the time that the plan was adopted was just over 300 houses. So 10% of the 300 existing properties within Washford would allow for around about, and it's not a set figure, around 30 units to be delivered within the settlement over the plan period. So at the moment, with just 21 commitments, that upper limit has not been met. The application site itself is now proposing 8 units, and we're content that the provision of 8 units in this instance does meet the definition of limited development. In terms of policy SC1, sites also need to be well related to existing services and facilities, and the application site itself is within a walkable distance of the existing service provision within Washford. The village has a shop, it has hairdresser, it has a primary school, a pub that's currently closed, and a regular bus service, and various other bits and pieces, including a service station and so on and so forth. Having reviewed the background detail as to the allocation of, or the identification of Washford as a primary settlement when the local plan was adopted in 2016, there has not been a significant change in service provision. The pub has been open and closed, as is quite common nowadays. The post office similarly has been closed, but the understanding is now that it's now open again and trading. And so, having discussed matters with planning policy colleagues, we're content that the identification of Washford as a primary settlement within the local plan continues to hold full weight, and there is no reason not to assess the proposals against said policy. The application in terms of the impact upon the heritage assets and the adjacent listed building, we're content now that the provision of 8 units and the omission of the eastern part of the site satisfactorily preserves the setting of the listed building. That eastern part of the site will remain as agricultural land, and there's a condition that's recommended within the report that will ensure that it's not subject to any future development of any form, other than should somebody make a planning application, at which point we would have to determine that. So any future buildings, be that agriculture, residential, commercial, whatever it may be, that would require planning permission. Our conservation officer has assessed the proposals and is satisfied that the setting of the listed building is now acceptably mitigated, and the development is acceptable in heritage terms. In terms of the character and appearance of the wider area, as you've seen from the photographs, the site itself is a relatively level parcel of agricultural land. It's well related to the contiguous built-up area of Washford, with new residential development to 2 sides effectively. The northern part of the site would be retained, as indicated on the indicative plan, for providing surface water attenuation basins and the like, and hedgerows and tree planting will also be preserved. The site itself isn't overly visible within the wider landscape, and given its relationship to the built environment, we're content that the development can be delivered without adversely impacting upon the character and appearance of the surrounding landscape. In highway terms, as I mentioned previously, the site is well related to services and facilities within the settlement, as well as bus services, which are quite regular and frequent along the A39. The access that's proposed has been assessed by Highways as being acceptable and suitable for servicing 8 residential dwellings. And Highways also gave consideration to the impact of 8 additional dwellings and the associated movements upon the junction between Hewish Lane and the A39. Although that is quite a sharp bend in the highway on the A39, Highways were content that the 8 units and the associated movements would not cause severe adverse impact on highway safety or the free flow of vehicles and traffic along the roads, and therefore there's no objection from Highways to the proposed development. Impact upon residential amenity, that is really an issue for the reserved matters stage, but based upon the indicative design that's been presented, we are satisfied that development can be delivered on the site without impacting upon the amenity of nearby properties, whether that's light, privacy, noise, and so on. So in conclusion, officers have reviewed the application. We've gone into great depth and detail to review policy SC1 and the compliance of Washford as a settlement under that policy. We're content that the development can be brought forward in compliance with policy SC1. It's a sustainable location and it's readily accessible to public services, facilities, and sustainable modes of transport. Overall, the development can be mitigated in terms of biodiversity, trees and hedgerows, and surface water drainage, and conditions are recommended to that effect. So the recommendation to members this afternoon is that planning permission is granted, subject to Section 106 agreement that will secure a contribution towards affordable housing, either for off-site contribution or for the provision of sorry, free units on site. Yes, sorry, yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ross. Okay, now I've got only one public speaker on this, and that's the agent, Matt Tucker from Savills. Mr. Tucker, if you'd like to come up to the front desk, and when you're ready, push the right-hand button. Okay, and your time starts then. So when you're ready, get yourself comfortable first.
So good afternoon, Chair and councillors. Firstly, I'd like to thank Russell for his comprehensive presentation on the scheme and his hard and thorough proactive work in working with the applicant to bring forward what we think is a sustainable development for Washford. I'm Matt Tucker, an Associate Director at the Southwest Planning Team at Savills. As the planning agent for this application, I speak in favour of the proposed development for 8 residential dwellings at land to the north of Hewish Lane. This application was previously heard at the committee in March 2023 and was deferred to allow further opportunity to review the sustainability of Washford as a primary settlement and whether it remains as suitable for accommodating further residential development. Following the deferral, a technical note has been submitted that demonstrates Washford remains a sustainable settlement that benefits from a good range of services and facilities. In particular, the village shop had closed at the time of the previous application, but has now reopened and has extended hours of opening. In accordance with the settlement hierarchy set out in the local plan policy SC1, Washford is a sustainable location for new housing. Development management and the planning policy officers have confirmed this position, and therefore the previous reason for deferral has effectively, in our view, fallen away. It is noted in the officer report that a previous scheme for 14 dwellings on the site was refused, then subsequently dismissed at appeal. Since then, the applicant and their agents have worked together positively with officers, and the project team have overcome the reasons for refusal of the previous planning application, as Russell's explained. The key changes made to this scheme include reducing the number of dwellings from 10 to 8, thus preserving the setting of the Grade 2 listed Linhay building to the south of the site. The changes to the scheme have also led to positive officer recommendation and no objection from technical consultees, including Highways and the lead local flood authority. I would request that members of the committee consider the following points when making their determination. In the context of the council's policy definition, the development will provide limited yet proportionate housing development to Washford, which remains a sustainable settlement. The development will also provide policy compliant level of affordable housing, either through 3 affordable units on site or a contribution in lieu. The illustrative plan also shows that the development can be delivered in a manner that safeguards amenity and the privacy of existing residents. And lastly, the creation of 8 households will help to support the viability of local businesses and facilities that are important to the village, including the recent reopened shop. As a result of the continued and extensive proactive work with your officers and the amendments made to the scheme over the past 3 years, I trust members will look upon the scheme favourably and resolve to approve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tucker. Thank you. Okay, now I'll come to the councillors in a moment. I'm going to start with Mandy Chilcott, and there's a reason for that, and that's because I was advised at 12:30 this morning that the parish council had not made some comments that they wished to make, and that, of course, is 24 hours after the deadline. So I've agreed with Mandy Chilcott that she can have a couple of extra minutes to point those things out, and I've asked planning administration to send out the note to all parish councils, reminding them of the new constitution and their responsibilities about timing. So I'm sure that will be acceptable to everybody in the room. So I'm going to start with Mandy, and then I'll come to you, Mandy. Okay, Mandy.
Thank you. I'll be as concise as I can. I am covering the parish at the moment because Christine's on long-term leave, and the parish council meeting was last evening. They raised some issues which I've got in front of me, and I've just felt it was fair to share them with you, and hopefully it'll be helpful to today's thought process. So, as I said, they met last night, and they were unable to attend today due to the lateness of the notification, and their objection remains as outlined in the officer's report. They were very grateful for the previous deferral, which we've heard talked about already. It was considered, as we heard, in March, and they'd actually been expected to be contacted by the applicant and or the planning officer to collate further information requests by the committee to demonstrate that Washford remains a sustainable location for further development. They were disappointed that it does not happen, but they've noted the new technical note and revised officer report, and they disagree with these recommendations and wonder how the new council can truly represent its residents when one of its published aims, when it talks about seeking further views. They actually undertook quite an extensive piece of work actually to try and assist. They surveyed the residents of Washford to find out how sustainable it was, or how the residents felt how sustainable it was to live there. And they did provide a summary, which unfortunately they were too late because last night's meeting to provide to you. They feel it demonstrates that most residents rely on the car for work, shopping and leisure, and that these are generally not available in Washford. I think we've had that demonstrated by the limited services that are available there. And any new residents will find themselves in the same situation. So they maintain that Washford is no longer a sustainable location. And just to give you some background on the work that they did, there were 300 houses in Washford. There were 101 returns, so just over a third. And of these, 73% own their own homes, and the rest of these were rented. There are often all facts and figures which I won't sort of trawl through from expediency, which I've been asked for the chair. But I would say that it would appear that most residents, as you would expect, shop in Minehead and Willerton and are using their cars and not public transport. And the most frequently used local facilities are village shop or post office, despite issues around or difficulties with parking and access. Recreation ground, mineral line are popular within the settlement, but questions were raised over the standard of play equipment, which is Somerset Council, so I understand from last night. So that's another issue for another day. And most people use the local doctors, whether in Watchet, Willerton or Dunster. So I just felt it was a really actual useful bit of work for them to have done within the parish, and they've certainly spoken to a lot that live there. But based on the responses they got, their feeling is still, as I said, that it is not a sustainable location, given the evidence they've gathered. And thank you for your forbearance. They would have loved to have been here, but like I said, the timescales involved, they just couldn't manage it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. Andy Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm a bit conflicted on this one at the moment by highways, to be quite honest. So I'm after a bit of advice on clarification. All the objections seem to be around Hewish Lane, with the congestion up and down Hewish Lane. But there has been no objections by highway to the traffic on Hewish Lane. They haven't put, this is an application for reserved matters and access. And outline and access, sorry, outline, plan permission and access, and yet there's no objection by highways to the access, even though they're saying that the access isn't suitable to be adopted by the Somerset Council. So is that a material issue that we should be considering, or is that, that's where I'm confused really.
I'll bring the officer back in on that point, Andy, and if you've got something else, I'll bring you back in afterwards, okay?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Hadley. Yeah. So the Highway Authority commented on what is the indicative layout of the site. So there's two elements here really. The key from a highway perspective is the access, and that is the physical access that comes from Hewish Lane onto the driveway that then goes up to serve the existing properties there and what would be this development site. Highways have confirmed that they have no objection to a development of 8 dwellings utilising that access to access the development site. The points that you raised regarding the adoption of the internal estate road or otherwise, they are initial comments only effectively, because what we're not seeking to, what the application doesn't seek to do is to actually set the layout and the detailed design of the estate. That is a matter for the reserved matters application. At that point, the developer may come in with a scheme that does show a highway layout within the estate that is adoptable. If it's not capable of being adopted, what would then ordinarily happen is it would be put into a management company, kept in private ownership, and it would be down to that management company to maintain the estate road and infrastructure. It's not that the internal layout and the highway layout that's shown on the indicative plan is unacceptable in highway terms and safety terms.
Yeah, can I just come back on The issue I wasn't necessarily on the internal, because obviously I understand that may change. It was the actual access to the road, but they said couldn't be adopted because it wasn't wide enough to have the footpaths and the displays. Is there enough room to make it adoptable? And if it's not adoptable, is it going to be safe enough to put that access there? That's why I'm confused that they haven't objected, even though it's not wide enough.
And the simple answer is, if it isn't capable of being widened to be adopted, then it will be kept in private ownership and maintained to that effect, in the same way as what's already happened with the five dwellings, the new bungalows that were shown. They utilise that same access, as did the terrace properties at front onto Hewish Lane. From Highway's perspective and from my perspective, that access is safe in highway terms, in terms of pedestrian and vehicular access onto and off of Hewish Lane.
Okay, Sarah Wakefield, please.
Yes. Could you put up the plan which shows the site in relation to the village? I think it was sort of red line, circular line showing where it is in relation to the village. Bit further, earlier than that, I think that one, yeah. So looking at that, it looks like infill almost, because it looks like it's almost within the village. But what you haven't said, and maybe you did, and maybe I missed it, is it within the village envelope? Is it allocated land? Is this a speculative development? I suspect it probably is. We don't know who the developer is because it's fronted up by Savills, so we don't actually know who it is, but that doesn't really matter. I'm just interested as to whether this is land that's been noticed for development, or whether somebody's just come along, because this is the sort of thing I'm concerned about all across the county, is people just lighting on a piece of land and applying for it and saying, well, I can get away with that, so I'll come up with another one. What I like about it is that it's been through the planning process and it's been turned down at 14, it's gone down to 10, and now it's gone down to, I like that. I think that's a good example of the planning process working well. So I'm happy about that. I just wanted to know how it's come about, because, you know, I do worry about speculative sites not being what we planned for.
Okay, yeah, good questions. And this is one of the slight anomalies with the former West Somerset local plan, is that other than your main towns, so Willerton, Watchet and Minehead, there are no allocations for housing. Within the primary and secondary settlements, which Washford is one, there is a policy SC1 which states that for sites that are within 50 metres of the contiguous built-up area of the village, housing development will be supported, subject to various criteria being met. And as I mentioned during the presentation, that's where the definition of limited development comes in. And this is how the local plan seeks to control the number of dwellings that will be delivered at those primary and secondary settlements, to make sure that they don't get out of control, shall we say. Because you could end up with speculative developments for, say, Washford. If this were to be approved today, then Washford's looking at 29 approved units within the village, which is right on the threshold of the 10% increase over the plan period. Thereafter, we would then be looking at housing delivery as a whole within that settlement to see if it's going to have an adverse impact upon the community and service provision, so on and so forth. So in answer to your questions, no, the site isn't within the settlement boundary, because primary and secondary villages don't have settlement boundaries. The limitation is effectively set by that 50-metre definition. It's not allocated land, and therefore we have to refer to local plan policy SC1 to determine whether or not the site is suitable for housing development.
Councillor Farmer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Couple of questions for you here. In terms of Section 106 agreement, I'd like to see, you know, the ability to deliver affordable housing, as well as, you know, is either or rather than just a financial contribution. So I think if you can actually input that, it would be something useful, because it's much needed. I looked at that access, and you referred to the access being wide enough, but in terms of measurements, do we know what it is? does it actually allow 2 cars to go by? And because that makes it more adoptable in terms of highways when it comes to being adopted later on, I think.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So in terms of the 106, absolutely, and the intention is to secure either the delivery of free affordable units on the site, or as it's set out in the report, the contribution of 400 and something thousand pounds for the delivery of affordable housing within the same catchment area. So that would certainly be carried forward. The access plan, I'm afraid it's not overly clear because of it's pixelated, but the access there is shown as being the actual highway element is 5 meters with 1 meter margins as almost a shared surface, which is as you see it on the photograph, which I can just pop down to as well if you like. So that's 6 meters wide in total, which is sufficient space for 2 vehicles to pass one another and have a margin for pedestrians to use. Shared surfaces now are coming about more and more within small scale developments.
Okay, do you want to come back on anything? No, okay. Carol Ellis, please.
Yeah, thanks. Are these, they won't be, I know the answer to this. These are not planned to be zero carbon homes, are they? That's one question. I've got other, I'll do them all. Okay, so I've got a question about the standard to which they're going to be built, because nobody should be building anything that is any less than zero carbon, and you can do that in a variety of ways. And we've done it as a small developer, and it doesn't really add much to the cost, despite what ignorant people may say. I've got no issue in terms of the number of dwelling. I think it's really good, as Sarah has said, that actually there has been this engagement and it's got down to a level which I think, you know, is kind of acceptable in terms of the numbers. My concern is to what standard they're being built, because that's a sustainability issue and we seem to kind of forget about that. And also this question about who decides then whether it's going to be 3 much needed discounted open market properties or the financial contribution, because I don't know, it would seem much better for them to do it, because other what you're saying within the catchment, but we've already been told if this goes ahead, there's only got room for like 1 extra dwelling in the Washford area. So I'm just confused who decides which way the cookie crumbles in that regard, whether it's the financial contribution, and then what you would do that, how you would possibly build within the catchment for that amount of money 3 affordable properties. Who decides that? Do we decide it? Do we say we would rather X and Y, and what are the pros and cons? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in terms of zero carbon, I think we would all love to see every house going up being zero carbon and passive house design and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have a planning policy either locally or nationally that you can actually impose that requirement upon housing developers. So whilst it's aspirational, we can only really look at bringing that forward if it's something that a developer would bring to us. So there's no control at present over the actual construction of the dwellings, other than having to meet the current building regulation requirements. So yeah, that's the situation on that. In terms of who decides whether or not the council receives a financial contribution to offsite affordable housing, or if the free discount market units are delivered on site, ultimately that would be a decision for the house builder to make. So I would imagine that if planning permission is granted, the site would be sold to a housing developer, who would then decide which is the most viable option. In my experience, I would anticipate free discount market units being provided on the site. There's no guarantee of that, because finding a housing provider, a registered provider, to take free, to effectively come forward with free sites elsewhere within the village is going to take a lot longer. There's also a need for discount market housing in Washford, as the report states. There was the latest report identified a need for 5 discount market units within the village. So I would anticipate that potentially coming forward. There's no guarantees, but yeah.
And for clarity, the figure being suggested is 487,000. Sorry, £487,038 for 3 units. Okay, so it's a reasonably substantial sum of money for housing provision elsewhere. Andy wants to come back.
It's just for a clarification on that, really. If they was to say they wanted to pay the figure and then try and provide very affordable houses somewhere else, would their houses have to be within Washford? Because what I'm saying, I mean, obviously with these coming up to you nearly at 30, you're nearly at your threshold of how many houses you can actually build. You made a very good point on that. You're nearly at threshold. So if they choose to pay the money, is that money just going to get lost to a different area altogether? And Washford's not going to benefit from that.
Ultimately, it shouldn't do, and it should be ring fenced to the parish. And then if no sites come forward, I would imagine that have the requirement for the affordable housing provision, then it may be looked at elsewhere. But the council, the housing delivery team here at Somerset Council would have overall control and say on that. The idea is that it would satisfy the local housing requirement.
Okay. Manley, do you want to come back on something?
Sorry, can I ask a question? Are we still linked to this one? Thank you. Just a couple of questions really, because we have already heard that they are nearly at that limit, and it comes back to that same question. Will it be allowed there still if you're then beyond the limit? We've talked a lot about the numbers reducing today. I'm still not clear on that point. But I've got a different point to raise, if I may. Could you bring up the picture of the village again? And I just don't know if everybody knows it well, but the village is split right through with the A39, which you can see going from left to right or right to left, depending which direction you're travelling in. That is one of the busiest pieces of highway infrastructure in Somerset. I think people forget that. It's in a really rural area, but it's a very, very decent piece of infrastructure. Some of the sustainability locations you were talking about, post office, pubs and hairdressers, actually sit on the opposite side of the village, and more importantly on the opposite side of the A39. There is nowhere to cross the A39, and if you want to walk between that location and some of the locations we've been talking about and had cited, you have the A39, there is no verge, there is no path, there is a road with a wall adjacent to it. So my question is around SC1, which we've discussed a lot today, but the point that keeps coming back into my head is it should also allow safe and easy access. So my question is, and I've got another one following, is does it give safe and easy access to these other things you're talking about? And also, I think we're looking at sustainability of all our smaller settlements in Somerset. Pubs, shops, post offices at the moment are opening and closing fairly rapidly, and whereas the settlement might be viable and sustainable right now, I think as a whole Somerset are seeing a lot of areas where they were and suddenly they're not. And I would just add to that a comment around the bus. The bus, the 28 is one of the buses at risk in Somerset. There were 4 cited by this council, and currently it is subsidised until the spring. So, you know, if people are relying on a bus and you are relying on that, I think it's fair to say that at the moment the bus is at risk, and I think it's fair that the planning committee know and understand that. I hope it's not. It's the only link we've got sort of through the main settlements, but currently it's subsidised, and that is fairly short term. So if I can leave those questions with you.
Okay, yeah, in terms of safe and easy access, absolutely, policy SC1 does require sites to have safe and easy access into villages and around villages, and to access services and facilities. Although I don't know Washford like the back of my hand, like some people will do, there are pavements in and around the village, and there are alternative routes in order to access services and facilities other than directly walking along the A39, which I do acknowledge is a busy highway, and it's quite narrow in certain sections of the village there. What I would say is that from my perspective, the site is within a walkable and walkable distance of those services and facilities, and there are, as I said, there are footpaths and so on available to provide access. Alternative modes of transport, they include cycling. You could cycle in and around the lanes to access them, should you wish. From my perspective, from a planning perspective, my assessment was that this is a location within the settlement that is within a safe and easy walking distance of services and facilities. The vast majority of the village is on that northern side of the A39. A lot of people currently have to traverse the A39 to access those services and facilities. And given that the council has previously approved and more recently new development within this approximate location under the similar policy approach, I think it needs, from my perspective, it's accepted that the site is accessible. You also mentioned the future sustainability of the settlement in regard to the services and facilities, the shop, the pub, so on and so forth, opening and closing. Likewise, the bus service being put at risk from losing its funding. One thing that won't happen with small service villages such as this is that if there isn't small controlled incremental growth over the next 10, 15, 20 years, the services and facilities are bound to lose out. If you don't have new people coming into villages offering additional spending and usage of bus services and so on and so forth, then there's every chance that they will fall by the wayside. And so from my perspective and from a planning angle, I would look at it as a positive element that new housing does bring additional spend within the local economy. And that would hopefully, albeit only at a smaller scale at 8 units, that will have a benefit to the existing service provision within the village.
I'm still concerned about the safe, but I respect your response. Thank you.
I've got two councillors that still wish to speak and haven't spoken yet, so I'm going to go to them. Now, the agent, Mr. Tucker from Savills, has requested to speak again. Now, I don't allow that unless it is a point of clarification. And if the point you're going to make is not picked up in the next couple of minutes conversation, they will invite you back for a point of clarification only. Okay. Right, so the two councillors remaining are Steve Pugsley and followed by Derek Perry. And I'll remind Derek that he arrived late, so can speak but can't vote on this item. Steve.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm always mindful and very appreciative of the comments of Aldclyffe Parish Council on planning matters, because they do take planning very, very seriously, always have. And those of us that served on West Somerset Council know over the years how we have walked up and down Washford looking at various sites, including, I have to say, this one over the years. So I don't by any means take anything that they say lightly, and I'm sure that what they say is always valuable to hear, and indeed for us to just double check, make sure that we are right in our conclusions. However, we operate a plan-led system, and we have been told very clearly that this application is acceptable in planning policy terms, and the concerns of the consultees have been addressed, and that there are 25 conditions, I think, 27 conditions, covering so many aspects of this development that are attached to the suggested approval. I therefore do not in all conscience feel that we have any defendable ground to turn this application down. And as it hasn't so far, I think, been proposed, I am going to propose that we should accept and approve this proposal this afternoon, whilst, however, recognising the quality of the comments from the Parish Council and valuing very much what they have said.
Thank you for that, Stephen. I've made a note of your proposal. We'll get to the rest of the comments from councillors, and I'll seek a seconder, and we'll take it from there. Derek.
I thought the fact that I can't vote is going to stop me from speaking, then nothing coming. Just briefly though, ultimately it seems to me that the decision for the committee on this is going to come down to an assessment of sustainability. There's different aspects to sustainability. One of the aspects of sustainability that strikes me as being particularly important in West Somerset is the demographic of the population in that area. We know that West Somerset has one of the highest average ages of anywhere in the country, and part of what makes a community sustainable is working age people, young families, so on and so forth. Now, we know also that villages in West Somerset tend to have the highest of the upper age average, you know what I'm saying? And so it's the villages very often that suffer in that regard. Now, to me, looking at the houses in question, yes, we've got a couple of 2 beds, but half of them are either 3 bed or there's one 4 bed as well. So at least half of these can genuinely be said to be family homes. And although there's been talk about post offices and hairdressers and pubs which are open from time to time, it's within 3 minutes walk of the primary school. I don't know how full the primary school is. It's within an even closer walk to the village hall, and it's within a pretty short walk to the local park as well. If I was somebody with a young family looking to move to a village in West Somerset, that site strikes me as quite a good place to move. Equally, if there were young families living within the area already, it's a pretty good place for them to move. So in that sense, I think this site probably does contribute to sustainability. And although I totally note the way that other facilities are dispersed around the village, I think we have to be realistic about what matters to people of a certain age group. That's not disrespecting post offices at all. But, you know, also, although we have to be realistic about how much people in West Somerset are going to use public transport, well, actually, that is as major a bus route as it gets in West Somerset, and it's within walking distance of the bus stop. So for me, although I note the concerns, I think this is I would have supported this quite happily. The one thing I will say is, having said all the good, nice, fluffy stuff about kids walking to school in the park and all the rest of it, I'm not sure I buy this thing about the shared access. I've looked on Google Images. I've seen the images being put up there. The street lighting down that lane ain't fantastic. If I was moving in there with my kids, one of the best things would be, yeah, walk to school, yeah, walk to the park, come home when it's tea time, old-fashioned kids outside living. What I wouldn't like is them walking in on that shared space. If something can be done to put some kind of pavement in, all the better.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, did you want to come back on a point? No, it was you're looking to second the proposal. Okay, so I'll take that as done. Now, Mr. Tucker, we spoke a few minutes ago. Is your point of clarification something that has not been dealt with?
It's just 2 minor points.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members. It was 2 points of clarification. One is that the shared surface access is permitted under council's highway guidance in their SPD. So whilst it is not as wide as some may like, it is permitted, so can be adopted. That's just not been clarified by county highways. So that was a point. And the second point was just to mention about the bus services. There's an outline planning permission pending that has a resolution to grant for 350 houses on the west of Willerton. That includes a substantial transfer of funding towards provision of bus services between Willerton across to Minehead. So actually that extra funding should hopefully secure that facility, certainly for a period longer than is currently in question. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Just for clarification, Russell, can we just confirm that the 15 units Mr. Tucker has just referred to are part of that block that we were talking about earlier in your presentation? It encompasses the going up to the 21, going up to possibly 29 if this item is approved.
No, so the site referred to by Mr. Tucker is one of the allocated sites at Willerton, which has a resolution to grant subject to the 106 for 350 units. And it's that scheme that makes a financial contribution towards bus service provision.
I was going to ask next about the substantial contribution. So whose definition of substantial we're using? Thank you for the clarification. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. Okay, well, we're now at the point where the proposal has been proposed by Stephen Pugsley and seconded by Sarah Wakefield that we accept the officer's recommendation. And we are now looking at voting on it. So can I see those in favour of this application, please? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's unanimous. That's unanimous. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. That's unanimous. That application has been passed. We're very fortunate we don't have to change officer. Russell just needs to turn the page and we'll move straight into agenda item 6, which is 48/21/0042. And it's an application for full planning permission. And it is for replacement buildings at Hyde Lane Business Park, Hyde Lane, Bathpool. And that's Edge of Taunton, TA28BU. Russell, I know you're presenting for one of your colleagues who's on leave, but when you're ready, we'll move into that one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll do my best to navigate the presentation and present as best as possible. So yes, the application is to effectively replace existing business units and buildings at Hyde Lane Business Park at Bathpool, Taunton. So for some context, this map aerial shows the Taunton area, the eastern side, and you have Bathpool in the centre here, Taunton Rugby Club, which many people may be familiar with. Taunton Rugby Club is literally to the east of the application site, which is just south of Hyde Lane. The aerial here, a little bit more zoomed in. The site itself is a former chicken farm, so there's lots of dilapidated, I think that's being polite, timber, low-level timber buildings on the site. It's been used for many years for business and commercial purposes, with the last planning permission being in 2020, effectively allowing for the use of buildings for light industrial and storage and distribution use effectively. So the red line area here, it shows the extent of the application site, and the blue line's also within that area, and within the blue line area, I believe there is a residential dwelling which the owners own. This is the existing site plan. I'm afraid it's not overly clear, but you can see the linear poultry units here, which are all within business use, and access is off of Hyde Lane, just along the northern boundary. It's shown. So the proposed site plan, as you can see, the proposal is to demolish the long linear buildings that surround the property, and to erect one new L-shaped unit along the western boundary of the site. At present, there are 6 units within the existing units, and they offer 669 square meters of floor space. The application itself proposes 5 new units and reduces the amount of floor space down to 500 square meters. And my understanding that is in part to try and address concerns over the site and highways and access and the like. Just some initial floor plans, just to show you there. The site is within the functional floodplain of River Tone. So you could be up to your neck in water if there was a catastrophic flood, but the existing buildings themselves don't have any flood protection measures. There's no safe refuge space. And what the proposed development does do is to actually offer some accommodation above the flood zone, so that if there was a flood during the operating hours, which is highly unlikely, but if it were to, there's safe refuge clear of the flood zone. The building itself, as you can see, it's quite low level, and that has been negotiated back from what was originally submitted. You can see on the plans here, the previous height of the building was just over 7 meters, and that's now been scaled back to just over 4 meters, 4.5 meters. So that is now reflecting more kindly the low level nature of the poultry sheds that were previously on the, or are on the site. So here you get an idea of the site and its context and its kind of visual appearance along Hyde Lane. Safe to say there's certainly scope to enhance the appearance of the site there and to the benefit of the local area. So this is a photograph that's looking from inside the site north towards nearby houses along the northern side of Hyde Lane. So to the rear of the storage containers would be the highway. And then looking along the southern boundary out across the adjoining agricultural land, which, as I said, is floodplain. Just the site of one of the existing buildings. You can see there's missing sections of timber cladding and so on. And just on the right hand side, you can see that this is the Rugby Club car park in here. Similar position, just looking back into the Rugby Club car park from within the site. And again, just showing existing buildings that are up on the road frontage along Hyde Lane. And again, just another building for context. So the key considerations for the development is The principle of the development, well, effectively, what we have here is an existing employment site that's in active use. And the proposal is to replace the existing buildings with modern fit for purpose units with a slightly lower floor area. The site is within the open countryside, so it's outside of the development boundary technically. It is within the green wedge, and so we have to give consideration to how the development will respect the character and appearance of the immediate area. Officers are content that the overall redevelopment of the site and the replacement of the existing poultry sheds and now commercial units with one new building will enhance the general setting of the site. The overall reduction of the floor area itself will not necessarily result in a direct reduction in vehicle movements, but it certainly will hopefully ensure that there won't be an increase in vehicle movements. Vehicle movements is something that objectors have raised as points of concern, but given the lawful use of the site and the fallback position that they can continue to carry on operating as they do now, that has been sufficient to demonstrate, along with additional information that's been submitted, that Highways are content with the proposals, that there will not be any additional adverse impact upon highway safety, free flow of traffic within the area. And so there is no objection from Highways to the proposed development. There have also been objections from residential properties in the area, I believe mainly those to the north of Hyde Lane. From a planning perspective, the development doesn't itself look to change the use of the site, so the use of the site will remain for purposes light industrial and storage and distribution. And there's a condition that's recommended as per the update sheet to ensure that that does continue to take place. That being the case, it's a status quo effectively, that the use of the site will remain as is, and therefore the impacts upon residential properties within the area will be no greater than any impact that they currently experience. We would hope that the actual impacts would be reduced through modern building technology and construction techniques within the new building, and also consolidation of the units and their use within one building, one block, rather than a number of them across the site. So in conclusion, officers are content that the redevelopment of the site for business purposes complies with policy DM2 of the local plan and CP8, which looks at matters relating to the environment. There'll be no increase in issues and betterment from a flood risk perspective, and it's therefore recommended that planning permission is approved today. Thank you.
Thank you. I will point out again the update sheets that everybody saw, which is with an amended condition number 19, and this hopefully will allay some fears that have been expressed, and that is the premises shall be used for classes E, small parenthesis G and I, E, G and 3, and B8 only, and for no other purpose, including any other purpose in Class E of the Schedules of Town and Country Planning Use Classes Act, Order of 1987, or in any provision equivalent to that class in any statutory instrument revoking or reenacting the order with or without modification. So we are very clear in our conditions as to what can be permitted there and what can't be permitted there. I'm now going to open it up to, I'm now going to invite the only registered speaker for this, who's the agent, Lewis Dulling from Southern Property and Legal Services Limited. Mr. Dulling, if you come up to the microphone, sir, when you're ready, sit yourself down. When you're ready, push the right hand button and your 3 minutes start then, sir.
Thank you very much. Chair, members of the Planning Committee, thank you for the opportunity to address you this afternoon. I'm Louis Dulling, the planning agent for the applicant, Lee Hedges. This full application before you seeks to demolish existing buildings and erect a modern fit-for-purpose building for B8 storage and Class E, G industrial and office uses, as per the condition that has been updated. The application before you is the culmination of positive and proactive engagement with the local planning authority officers over 2 years. The application having been submitted back in July 2021. As a result of this positive engagement, the officer's recommendation of conditional approval is very much welcomed. The site currently comprises 2 chicken sheds and workshops in lawful industrial use. The proposed uses of B8 storage and Class EG Industrial and office uses will be controlled by way of condition. This will ensure that the proposals are acceptable in terms of car parking demand. This approach mirrors that of other planning permissions granted over the past few years at the site. Past approvals allowed office and storage uses at a greater scale, a further 169 square metres than the current proposals, and thus a greater demand for car parking than the proposals before you. For the avoidance of doubt, the applicant accepts all of the recommended conditions as set out in the planning officer's report. These past approvals at the site are relevant material planning considerations for the planning committee to consider when reaching a decision today. The planning officer also accepts the fallback position of the site in its existing state with a greater amount of floor space and greater associated car parking demand. During the application process, the applicant has responded to requests for revisions and additional information from the planning officer, and we have been accommodating over reductions in height, scale and location of the building. The planning officer concludes that the proposals are for an industrial building of a scale and mass that is in keeping with the character of the area. The proposals provide significant benefits, including securing the optimum use of a previously developed site, reducing the overall floor space of built form on site from 669 square metres down to 500 square metres. The visual appearance of the site will be significantly improved, consolidating a number of individual structures into one fit-for-purpose building, support for employment during the construction process, and provide employment opportunities during the lifetime of its operation. There's a further benefit of the provision of a landscape enhancement through the submission of a landscape strategy, which is secured by way of condition. And finally, and on behalf of the applicant, we thank you for your time and consideration. We trust that you will look favourably on our application and support your officer's recommendation of approval. Thank you.
Yes, I suppose I should start by sort of declaring an interest because I first of all became involved in this site back in 2006, when it was still just a chicken farm, but the husband of the now owner had recently died. And we originally gave planning permission for the chicken farm and for living units there for the life of the chicken farm. We agreed an extension, which was sensible at the time. Then followed a few years that the site wasn't necessarily that well used. But for the last 16 years or so, it has been an industrial estate with established use and much needed small industrial units. When this application came before the before the parish council, I've had to sit it out, but I've listened to the arguments that they put forward. The first, as the agent has just said, application with a nearly 8 metre, I'd say, rather than a little bit over 7 metre height, it was much too large an impact. They have taken on board the concerns that were expressed locally. That is, how do you get the cars off the road in particular and provide additional parking and cut down the extra, if you like, unit to reduce the height, reduce the impact. It'll be a great improvement to the area, basically, and I would wholeheartedly support the application.
Thank you. Any other councillors? Stephen?
If Councillor Cavill is actually moving it, I will second it.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the additional condition which we've been given and the reference to the new use, well, for my terms, the new use classes order, which I have to say, I'm not very familiar with. The things have all changed. I don't think B8 is what it used to be, which used to be storage.
Russell, would you please?
But what I wanted to ask was, if you refer to these very specific sub numbers like this, is this enforceable like that from a legal point of view? I'm sure it must be, but I just wanted to check that it was enforceable. And what I think was said by the applicant on behalf of the applicant was that they weren't changing the use in any effect. So that's important to me. And I'm a little bit concerned that there is other land owned by the owner on adjacent to the site, which could come up for further development. But I mean, I know we can't do anything about that, but I'm just, that's a concern I have. And that, is there enough parking within the site itself? You've got these units and you get visitors to them and things. I'm just a bit concerned about parking.
Okay, well, we'll get the officers to answer this question and we'll go on to other councillors. I'll come to you in a moment, sir. Russell?
Yes, so the use of the units that's set out within the additional condition reflect the existing lawful use of the site. And so from officers' perspective, it would be enforceable. They are quite specific, but that's because of the way in which the new planning use class C is set out, and it reflects the former light industrial and office use that would have been part of the current use site of the site. So we're content to that effect. Perhaps defer to Mr. Pinney on the enforceability of that, but I'm content that we're okay.
Thank you, Chair. On the subject of enforceability, the condition as it's worded meets the tests that apply to planning conditions imposed on planning permission, most notably in this case precision, because it's very precise as to the particular use classes which are acceptable. Just for further background for members, the reason an additional condition was felt to be necessary is because we're dealing here with an application which just refers to a single building, and this is in replacement for a part of the planning history in which we're dealing with an application which at the time referred to the specific use classes that were involved. So as on this occasion, we're just dealing with a building, it was necessary to constrain by condition the particular use classes that would apply here.
Okay. So you're a member of the public, you haven't registered to speak. So ordinarily I would not permit anybody to speak on an application that's not registered, because that is the system. Do you have a point you wish to make, and is it appetite to this application? You should have registered to speak. So I will permit it, but if you stray away from something, a very, very narrow path I've allowed you to open, I will shut you down, sir.
Thank you, Chair. No, I thought I registered to speak and I had a confirmation email.
Are you?
My name is Satish William, and I'm the resident and neighbor to the proposed site. I live just opposite to that site, and I thought I will just make some couple of comments that I may.
Okay, you say you registered to speak?
Yeah, and I had an email from the Democratic Services to say I can confirm you registered to speak as an objector for planning application.
Okay, well, you'll have your moment to speak now, and I will take this up with Democratic Services afterwards. If you'd be kind enough to forward that email to me, it's simon.coles@somerset.gov.uk, and I will look into it, sir.
Okay, will do. Thank you for the opportunity. So my name is Satish William, and I resident just opposite to the proposed HIDEG form. And I welcome the reduction in the proposal earlier on in terms of their height and the square meters, but I also would like to just raise a couple of concerns as a resident who has been directly impacted from the site for the last almost 10 years that I've been living there. I just to make a couple of more points around the traffic and the comments from the Transport Development Group. They have clearly stated there is no additional expansion of the site that would lead to a material increase in vehicles traffic. And I do welcome this, and I agree with that comment. But currently, at the moment, there are two operating businesses from that site. The Normandy Windows are about 5 to 6 vans probably operating, and there is office business furniture, which has other frequent vehicles. Now, the proposal have said there is about 5 more units coming in, which would potentially can increase that traffic to about 5 times if you're not clear about what exactly those traffic means. At the moment, there is nothing in the planning to say what type of vehicles or how much traffic can come and go. And knowing what Hyde Lane is, the width of that, it is extremely congested some days with 2 vehicles coming back to forth. There is no mention around the working hours. Currently, I think the working hours should be implemented on weekdays, and also the weekends are very busy with the rugby teams playing there, and there's a lot of traffic included. So the weekends has to be non-operating from the site, purely for the safety and also for providing the peace to the neighbors. As a person, as I said earlier, directly opposite to the site, we have been the victims, in fact, of the direct consequences of the previous decision to remove the well-matured hedging that lined the site and protecting wildlife species, and also forming a good barrier to our road users at the time. Since it's taken down, there has been no further landscaping at all in the site, in spite of us reporting, and also in spite of that being in the previous planning application. I have no confidence, therefore, I'm afraid, that the future landscaping that are included in the planning applications could be completed or implemented in time. And I want to raise it to the council to make some implementations, priorities about the landscaping around the hedging, around the tree planting, and there should be a time frame and timeline, and this has to be implemented before any work has to be started there. In the last 4 years, there has been mandatory requirement and timeline to other hedges, but nothing has really, in fact, been done in that site, and that's why it's fully exposed at the moment. Whatever work or units that is going to be there in future, I think they have to be managed through professionally, because at the moment it is ad hoc and it has created a lot of noise, pollutants to the neighbors, and there is any work, new work has to be done after, really going through that it has been safe to the neighbors, and all the demolition has been done in line with the regulations, so that there is no intrusion to the neighbors' privacy, either with even the lightings or any windows or any direct view from the site onto the neighbors itself. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If you turn the microphone off, that would be very helpful. Thank you very much for your comments, sir. I will, let's say, if you send me your email, I will look into it. Okay, I would refer councillors to page 69 of your papers and page 77 of your papers, where I think everything the gentleman has just discussed has been covered in your officer's report. Russell, is there anything you'd like to come back on?
Only to confirm that condition 11, as recommended, deals with the landscaping, prior agreement of that and its timing, which is standard, and noise. Although there are no operating hour restrictions on the site, there aren't at present, so it would be unreasonable to impose such a new condition now. Noise from the site can be controlled, and condition 19 recommends that. And importantly, I think condition 19 sets out that on Saturdays, Sundays and bank holidays, noise emissions shall not be audible when measured from residential properties or other noise sensitive boundaries. So that itself will put pay to any slightly more intensive works other than perhaps deliveries from the site.
Okay, and there's one technical, which is that it's actually not condition 19 on the update sheet, it's actually condition 20. But it's a small technical, but just to make sure we're tidying things up. Derek, did you want to come in?
Bit of detail, probably quite important to go into. So on the landscaping condition, so they need to submit the plan, the landscaping scheme, but in terms of what that scheme entails and whether or not it, to some extent, replicates or remedies what's been taken away in terms of a green barrier to the road and for neighbours. Do we have any input into that, or will that be a matter for officer consideration?
So the process is that the developer will need to submit a detailed landscaping scheme setting out the layout of the landscaping scheme on the site, species, numbers, etc., etc. That will then go to the relevant officer within the planning department, ordinarily your case officer, and then they will liaise with the landscape officer to agree the planting scheme, the landscaping scheme. So it wouldn't be something that comes back to members, but it would be dealt with by officers.
Just thinking aloud here. I know what it is. I mean, I go to the rugby club fairly regularly. I'm kind of a vague idea of what's happened in terms of the landscaping changes there. I sense that from the neighbour's point of view, they would like something bigger, like that was there before, some kind of screening, green screening. My slight concern is that if we take the sort of base point with what it is now, that something could be approved, which is just a tidying up of what's there now, as opposed to something more like what was there before. Is there anything we can do other than that, other than kind of just say it like I just have?
That would be down to the discretion of officers, but I think it's a valid point, and it's something that could perhaps be added as an advisory note on the decision, making to draw officers' attention to the fact that the landscaping scheme ought to include screening along the road frontage if feasible.
Okay, I'm going to bring Norman in and then Sarah. Norman.
Sorry about this, but it's one of the things that I was concerned about. So I was quite pleased to read in this the report on under the landscaping section that some of the poplars should be not put in there. 5 trees should be again included: maple, willow, poplar, black poplar, oak, random space, etc. And looking for hedge to be established effectively low screen level in perpetuity. Yes, just as a starter, and they're talking about randomly positioned in more naturalistic way, etc. And that it's recommended that a minimum of 5 meters is allowed between the centre of the hedges, hedge banks, and face the proposed building, so that you will get back, if you like, the hedges are surrounded that are historic features and warrant being conserved as well. It is going after what you're asking for, Derek, there. It's not defined, admittedly. Sorry, the officer's been pitched in when Denise has been dealing with this quite a bit. So it is there. So, yeah, and I'd like to come back a bit later.
I just want to make sure that the committee's happy with what's being suggested. So if you're not, now's the time to make a proposal to change it. I've got Sarah first and then you. Sarah?
Yeah, just listening to what the gentleman was saying, I had noted that there are restricted hours for noise emissions to weekdays, which I think is a good thing. But is it really the case that just because there isn't a restriction now on vehicle movements or whatever late at night, it's okay to continue with them? What we are having here is 2 old poultry units. Now we've got 5 units, which could potentially be let to 5 different businesses. I suspect if the 2 businesses are going to stay there, they're going to take 3 each or 2 each or something. But, you know, is that really unreasonable in a residential area and where there are a lot of movements of traffic, particularly on Saturdays during the rugby, to restrict? I just think it's, and I'm just asking the question, really.
I think it comes back to what's reasonable. And is it reasonable to start imposing new controls over the use and the operation of the site when no controls currently exist? And whilst I take the gentleman's points, I think that in this instance, given albeit the unrestricted nature and the use of the site, it would be unreasonable from a planning context to start controlling those issues. If there were amenity issues that were arising from it, then there are other powers available to the council to look into that through environmental health and neighbour disturbances and so on and so forth. I'm not convinced myself that imposing an hours of operation condition on this application would meet the tests. Mr. Pinney perhaps might advise the contrary, but.
Thank you, Chair. I think what members have to bear in mind here is you're dealing with a proposal before you, which is actually in itself an improvement in many contexts in terms of what's on the site now, compared with what the site will be when this is implemented. And so your appreciation of what the application achieves would already classify this as an improvement and an enhancement of various planning-based factors on the site. Mr. Williams is absolutely correct. Where you have a situation now, which we can identify as the fallback position where there are no hours restrictions, then it's arguably inconsistent with the site history and how the site has operated to attempt to impose an hours restriction now when this application achieves other improvements in how the site will operate.
I'll just come back on that. Just simply to say though, I don't know about the planning history. I'm not sure if that was set out in detail, but you know, we had a much laxer planning regime than we have now. You know, we do worry more about the way people live or try to live, and you know, we should be looking at laxer regimes in the past, which we're now tightening up on. I just, on behalf of the objector, I just wanted to make that point. You know, I can see why you might regard it as unreasonable and it is an improvement, I think, that the site will look better. But I also think the way we live now and the way we, you know, there's more people living, there's more concentration of population, more houses in the area, you know, that maybe there isn't a case for saying that they should restrict the house. But
Chair, just sort of finishing up on this point, reasonableness is, as members will be aware, one of the tests that's applicable to conditions. And when we're referring to the history of this site and what's been allowed in the past, page 63 of your papers says that we're only going back less than 5 years to November 2018, when permission was effectively granted for the sort of previous arrangements on the site. So technically, we're not dealing with something in the distant past where arrangements were more informal or more lax. This is this is a change to a recently approved regime, and any conditions you impose would need to be considered A, in the context of reasonableness generally, and B, in the context of the planning history as it appears on your agenda.
Yeah, for me, I actually would like to see the planting scheme strengthened. I think the improvements that are being made will very much enhance the area and the look of the area. When I looked at some of the slides there, it looked quite untidy and messy actually at the moment. So I'd just like that assurance that the site will be left in a tidy state, I suppose, once everything's finished. I think that will enhance the area for the residents that live around. But if we could actually just get some kind of strengthened assurance around the planting, I think I would be comfortable with that. And not only that, trees and shrubs and hedges, as well as being great for the environment, will shield sound and movements as well. So I think there's two functions that they would actually perform there. And for me, we've heard about the sound. I'm comfortable with the response with that. And they have got a rugby club very close by. And for me, that will probably generate a lot more sound and traffic, etc., than they're experiencing with this. So that's my point to make. If we can strengthen, I think it would do two things. I think shield the sound, protect the area, and I think would be appealing perhaps for the residents that have some concerns.
okay, Norm, you want to come back?
Yes, sorry about this. Don't let me put over to you if I slightly misled you at the beginning. It has not been a bed of roses over the last 16 years. Those chicken shed properties were not properly insulated or anything like they would be with modern units. The result was the business was needed, the business expanded. It was chaotic at times, it was noisy, it was dusty, the road wasn't sorted out. Gradually things got driven down, widened and modified. And I had a number of complaints from residents opposite. This is a modern building to a modern spec where it should be. It will, consequently, the noise level you get from it is vastly reduced. And if you want an example, all you have to do is to go up to Monkton Heathfield 1 development, where a large industrial unit has been put in, literally with a road not much wider than this one to the houses opposite, and at a higher height, not at a lower height in actual fact. And I haven't had noise complaints, lots of other complaints, but I've not had noise complaints or dust complaints from it. So it will be a modern working process, and I do think that it will be an improvement. Also, if you look at the whole plans for the area, sorry, Mr. Chairman, digressing, but up the road, there are plans for another 200 houses, right? And that access will come off of the new road, the Eastern Relief Road, the roundabout there, into Hyde Lane. the traffic that generally day to day goes up Hyde Lane to go reach St Michael will almost cease, because that will be the better way out. But that is in the future.
That is in the future, and it is to be hoped that the traffic on Hyde Lane will cease. I hope that that is the case in the fullness of time. Okay, are there any other final comments before we look to go to a vote on this item? I'm not seeing any councillors raise their hands. Okay, it's been proposed by Norman and seconded by Steve that we accept this recommendation with the additional condition as discussed, which is now condition 20. There's a typo. Can I see those in favour, please? Yep, and that's unanimous again. Okay. Right, I'm just going to bring Sarah Stevens in on the last item on our agenda, which is our normal look at planning inspectors' comments to us on appeals. Sarah.
Thank you very much, Chair, councillors. We just had one appeal since the last committee, which was dismissed, I'm pleased to say. It was accompanied by an application for costs, and that was also refused. I'll just very briefly summarise the main points of it. The appeal was for the change of use of land for the siting of 10 bell tents and the erection of a service building along with car parking and landscaping at land at Sweeney Hay and at Trull. The two main issues the inspector identified, one was the effect of the proposal on the character and appearance of the area. Sorry, my screen is not behaving. And the inspector noted that it was outside, the site was outside any nationally designated sites, and it was highly visible and prominent. And although we'd had a landscape statement from the appellant, the inspector actually disagreed with the findings and thought that there would be quite significant harm to the character and appearance of the area due to the scale and location of the buildings, which he described as harsh, isolated and prominent, and furthermore that the car park and tents would be an unusual and detrimental form of development in a rural landscape. And whilst he recognised that the tents could be moved out of the sort of tourist season, the other buildings and car park couldn't. And that finally the scale of any additional planting which was being proposed wouldn't actually screen the development, because actually the scale of planting that would be needed would be very significant and would actually be of such a scale that it would be unnatural and incongruous in the predominantly open landscape. So he was not at all persuaded by the appellant's arguments on that particular ground. The second ground was whether or not the site was in an appropriate location for the proposal, having regard to the development plan policies. And whilst the site was outside a settlement boundary, the inspector found it was close enough to a sustainable settlement, and as a location for a tourism use, it was acceptable. However, that did not outweigh the harm that he'd already identified in respect to the character and appearance of the area. So the appeal was dismissed. The cost application, it was an application for non-determination. Officers had tried to sort of negotiate, and hence the application hadn't been dealt with in time. But the appellant appealed on a number of reasons, including we were unreasonable, we hadn't tried to negotiate, we delayed what was an acceptable development, and a whole host of other reasons. I think, to put it succinctly, the appellant wouldn't have any of that and refused to allow an application of costs. Thank you. That's the only one.
Okay, thank you. It's always pleasing when the planning inspector agrees with Sarah.
Just to say that was in the area that I was representing when I was at Somerset West and Taunton, and it was a particularly difficult one because the residents were very, very angry about what was happening. Plus the 8 bell tents, nobody seemed to realise could mean up to 4 cars per tent potentially. So you know we thought the car parking was completely inadequate and the vehicle movements were underestimated because these were holiday lets, and you can have 4 couples in a tent for 8 people potentially, and so it was very concerning. So I'm very grateful that we were able to get this turned down.
I'm always pleased when the inspector agrees with me. Yeah, thank you very much for your attendance this afternoon, and please enjoy the rest of your afternoon and evening.